The morning Delia Crane found strangers setting up a wedding arch on her private pasture, she didn't scream. She didn't call the police. She walked back inside, poured herself a cup of coffee, and let them finish, because she had already made 3 phone calls that would dismantle Pamela Voss's entire world before the first dance ever played. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which was the kind of ordinary day Delia Crane had come to love. She had lived on Harrowfield Farm for 11 years, had built every fence post herself, had painted the barn twice, had planted the orchard in rows so precise that her neighbor Roy Ashford had once joked she must have used a ruler and a prayer. The farm sat on 14 acres of gently rolling land in Crestwell County, Virginia. Not dramatic country, not postcard country, just honest, working land that smelled of clover in June and wood smoke in October. Delia liked it that way. She was 43, recently divorced in the least dramatic way 2 people could separate. Her ex-husband Marcus had simply stopped wanting the same life she wanted, and after a long and mostly quiet negotiation, he had taken his architecture firm and his apartment in Richmond, and she had kept the farm. No bitterness, no war, just a clean division of a life that had grown in 2 different directions. Delia raised heritage breed chickens, kept a small herd of Hereford cattle, and grew heirloom vegetables that she sold at the Crestwell Farmers Market every Saturday. She also rented out the old stone mill house at the edge of her property to a quiet ceramicist named Thomas, who paid on time and kept to himself. Life was structured, purposeful, and entirely hers. She did not belong to the Crestwell Heights Homeowners Association. Her property predated the HOA's existence by decades, and when the association had been formed 12 years ago by a group of newer residents who wanted uniform mailboxes and approved landscaping schemes, Delia had simply ignored the invitation to join. She was rural residential, not suburban residential, and the distinction was not merely legal, it was philosophical. Pamela Voss, however, did not respect philosophy. Pamela was the HOA president, had been for 6 consecutive years, and operated with the specific energy of someone who had discovered a small domain of power and intended to maximize every inch of it. She drove a white SUV with a Crestwell Heights Beautification Committee bumper sticker. She sent written notices for unsanctioned garden gnomes. She had once called animal control on a neighbor's golden retriever for being, in her exact words, visually disruptive to the community aesthetic. She was 51, impeccably dressed, and possessed of an absolute certainty that her judgment was superior to that of everyone around her. She and Delia had crossed paths exactly twice before the letter. The first time was at the county planning meeting, where Delia had spoken against a proposed rezoning that would have benefited several HOA-adjacent developers. Pamela had stood at the back of the room looking at Delia the way a person looks at something inconvenient. The second time was at the farmer's market, where Pamela had approached Delia's booth, picked up a jar of honey, and then set it back down without purchasing it and said, "It's charming that you do all this." Delia had smiled with her mouth only. The letter, when Delia opened it at her kitchen table with her coffee going cold beside her, was printed on Crestwell Heights HOA letterhead. It was 3 paragraphs long. The first paragraph explained that the HOA had been selected to host the wedding reception of Brendan Voss, Pamela's son, and his fiancée, Courtney Aldrich, on the 14th of September. The second paragraph explained that after careful consideration of available venues, the HOA Social Events Committee had determined that Harrowfield Farms, South Meadow, and Barn would serve as the ideal location for the outdoor ceremony and reception. The third paragraph provided a schedule of the event, a list of vendors who would need access to the property beginning September 12th for setup, and a note that the HOA appreciated Delia's cooperation in making this community milestone possible. There was no question, there was no request, there was not even a polite fiction of one. Delia read it twice. Then she set it on the table, finished her coffee, washed her cup, dried it, and put it back on the shelf. She went outside and fed the chickens. She moved the cattle to the north pasture. She checked the irrigation in the vegetable beds. She did all of this with a steadiness that came not from peace, but from a particular kind of cold clarity, the clarity of someone who understands exactly what is happening and exactly what it means. When she came back inside at noon, she sat at the kitchen table with a notepad and wrote down 3 names. The first was Gerald Fitch, her property attorney. The second was Louise Marbury, the county agricultural inspector. The third was Raymond Cho, a journalist at the Crestwell Gazette who had written a piece about her farm 2 years ago and had told her at the end of the interview that if she ever had a story worth telling, she should call him. She did not call any of them yet. She wanted to understand the full shape of what Pamela had done before she responded to any part of it. She called Pamela Voss. Pamela answered on the second ring, her voice carrying the smooth, slightly elevated warmth of someone who has been expecting a call they expect to control. "Delia, I'm so glad you reached out. I hope you received our letter. I did, Delia said. I have a few questions. Of course. Though I think the letter was quite thorough. When did you intend to ask for my permission? A pause. Brief, but real. Well, this is a community event, and Harrowfield Farm is private property, Delia said. My private property, which is not governed by your HOA, not included in any HOA covenant, and not subject to your committee's decisions. Delia, Pamela's voice shifted into a register Delia recognized, the register of someone preparing to be patient with a difficult person. My son is getting married. This is an important occasion for our entire community. Your farm is the most beautiful venue in Crestwell, and I thought— You thought you would tell me, Delia said. Not ask, tell. I thought you would want to be part of something meaningful. Pamela. Delia kept her voice level. I want to be very clear. You do not have my permission to hold any event on my property on September 14th or any other date. You do not have permission to send vendors to my property. You do not have permission to use my barn, my meadow, my parking area, or any other part of Harrowfield Farm. If anyone enters this property for the purpose of setting up or conducting this event, I will treat it as trespassing and I will respond accordingly. Silence. Then, I think you're being very short-sighted. I think you sent a letter booking my farm for a wedding without asking me, Delia said. I think those two things are not equivalent. She ended the call. For approximately 48 hours, Delia believed the matter was resolved. Then the next letter arrived, this one on county stationery, which surprised her until she read it and saw that it was from the office of Supervisor Dale Kettering, who was, according to the Crestwell Heights HOA newsletter Delia had received unsolicited for 3 years, Pamela Voss's brother-in-law. The letter informed Delia that Harrowfield Farm was being scheduled for a county agricultural compliance inspection on September 10th, 2 days before the wedding vendors were scheduled to arrive. The letter further noted that several anonymous complaints had been filed regarding the farm's adherence to waste management standards, livestock density regulations, and pesticide storage protocols. Delia sat with this letter longer than she had sat with the first one. She understood the architecture of what was happening. Pamela had not accepted no, she had simply changed the method of pressure. The inspection was designed to create compliance obligations, real or manufactured, that would give Pamela some form of leverage. Either the farm would be found in violation of something, and Delia would be distracted with remediation, or the threat of inspection would make Delia more cooperative, or, and this was the version Delia suspected Pamela actually believed, Delia would simply decide that fighting back was more trouble than hosting a wedding. Pamela did not know Delia Crane very well. Delia called Gerald Fitch that afternoon. Gerald was 68, had practiced property and agricultural law in Crestwell County for 35 years, and had the specific, comfortable authority of someone who had spent decades being right in rooms where other people were wrong. He listened to Delia describe both letters without interrupting. The first letter is brazen, he said when she finished. No attorney worth a parking ticket would have advised it. The second is more interesting. Using a compliance inspection as leverage is not illegal on its face, but it creates a paper trail that tells a story. You want to document everything. I've already photographed both letters, Delia said. Good. Now I want you to get ahead of the inspection. Call Louise Marbury at the county AG office, not the supervisor's office, Marbury directly, and ask her to walk the property with you before the 10th. Create a record that you invited inspection. That transforms the narrative from a farm under scrutiny to a farmer who has nothing to hide. And the trespassing issue? If anyone sets foot on your property for the purpose of this wedding, we file immediately. We also send a formal cease and desist to Pamela Voss personally, to the HOA, and to every vendor mentioned in her letter. Today, before anything else happens. Delia agreed. Gerald had the letters drafted within the hour. They were sent by certified mail and email simultaneously, with delivery confirmation requested. She called Louise Marbury next. Louise was a practical woman who had been county agricultural inspector for 9 years and had no interest in political theater. She listened to Delia's account of the supervisor's letter with a flatness in her voice that told Delia she was not entirely surprised. I'll come out Thursday, Louise said, and for what it's worth, I've received zero internal communication about any complaints filed against your property. That letter came from the supervisor's office, not ours. I see, Delia said. I imagine you do, Louise said. Thursday's inspection took 4 hours. Louise walked every inch of Harrowfield Farm with the methodical thoroughness of someone who takes her job seriously regardless of who is watching. She inspected the waste management systems, the livestock documentation, the pesticide storage, the irrigation drainage. At the end, she sat at Delia's kitchen table and wrote her report by hand. "Clean," she said. "Completely clean. I'm going to flag the supervisor's letter in my records as having produced no findings, because that is accurate and because accuracy matters." Delia thanked her. Louise left. The farm had never been more documented in its entire existence. On September 11th, one day before the vendors were scheduled to arrive, Delia rose at 5:30, made coffee, and stood at her kitchen window watching the sun come up over the south meadow. She had not heard from Pamela directly since their phone call. She had heard from Gerald that Pamela's attorney, a man named Fitzwilliam Draper who operated out of an office in the county seat, had sent a letter arguing that Harrowfield Farm existed within a community context that implied certain shared obligations. Gerald had responded with 4 pages of property law that Delia did not read in full, but understood in spirit. Pamela had no case. Pamela had no argument. Pamela had nothing. And yet Delia stood at her window on the morning of September 11th with the particular tension of someone who knows that a person with nothing to argue and no legal standing can still show up. At 9:17 that morning, a white panel van with Meridian Event Rentals printed on its side turned onto the county road that ran along the western edge of Harrowfield Farm and slowed at Delia's gate. Delia watched it from the kitchen window. She did not go out. The van idled for approximately 3 minutes. Then it pulled forward. Then it stopped again. The driver's side door opened, and a young man in a polo shirt got out and looked at the gate, which was closed and bore a newly installed sign that read, "Private property, no trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted." Below that, in smaller but equally clear text, "This property is not available for the Voss Aldrich event. All vendors must cease and desist. Legal notice has been served." The young man took a photograph of the sign with his phone. He got back in the van. He drove away. 40 minutes later, Delia's phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, and she answered it to find herself speaking to a woman named Courtney Aldrich. Courtney's voice was not Pamela's voice. It was younger and less controlled and clearly frightened in the way people sound when they have just realized that a plan they trusted completely has a very large hole in it. "Ms. Crane," Courtney said, "I am so sorry to bother you. I'm Brendan's fiancé. I'm calling because I just got off the phone with the tent rental company and they said they can't access the property, and I need to understand what's happening because our wedding is in 3 days and—" "Courtney," Delia said, and kept her voice kind because Courtney Aldrich had not sent her either letter. "What did Pamela tell you about the venue?" A pause. "She said she had arranged everything. She said you had agreed." "I did not agree," Delia said. "I was never asked. I received a letter informing me that my farm had been booked. I told Pamela directly that I had not given permission. I sent a cease and desist to her, to the HOA, and to the vendors. None of that appears to have been communicated to you." The silence on the other end of the call was the silence of a young woman's careful, elaborate wedding plan collapsing in real time. "She told me it was handled," Courtney said, and her voice was very quiet. "I'm sorry," Delia said, and meant it. "I genuinely am. But this property is not available." The call ended. Delia stood in her kitchen for a moment, then picked up her phone and called Raymond Cho at the Crestwell Gazette. "Raymond," she said, "I have a story." Raymond Cho arrived at Harrowfield Farm at 2 in the afternoon with a notebook and a recorder and the alert, careful energy of a journalist who recognizes a story with actual substance. He sat at Delia's kitchen table and listened for 90 minutes while she walked him through the letters, the inspection, the cease and desist, the vendor situation, and the phone call with Courtney Aldrich. He asked questions that were precise and without editorializing. When she finished, he sat quietly for a moment. "Can I see the letters?" he asked. She handed him copies she had already prepared. "Can I speak to your attorney?" "I'll ask Gerald. I expect he'll speak to you." "The county inspection report?" "Louise Marbury filed it officially. It's public record." Raymond looked at his notebook. "Ms. Crane, can I ask, what do you want to come of this?" Delia considered the question with the care it deserved. "I want people to understand what happens when someone in a small position of authority decides that rules apply to everyone except themselves. I want the people Pamela Voss has been sending compliance notices to for 6 years to know that she used the supervisor's office, her brother-in-law's office, to generate a false inspection against someone who told her no." Raymond wrote something down. "That's the real story." he said. Not the wedding. The inspection. Yes, Delia said. Raymond published his piece 4 days later, after the date of the wedding had passed. It ran on the front page of the Crestwell Gazette with the headline, HOA President Used County Office to Pressure. Local Farmer After Dispute Over Unauthorized Event Booking. It was 800 words, factual, sourced, and utterly devastating in the specific way that factual and sourced journalism can be devastating when the facts are what they are. By the time Delia read it over her morning coffee, her phone had already received 14 text messages. 12 of them were from people in Crestwell County who had their own stories about Pamela Voss. 2 of them were from the same number, a Richmond area code she didn't recognize, that said only, "Thank you." She suspected it was Courtney. The HOA board met in emergency session 3 days after the article ran. Delia knew this because Roy Ashford, whose property bordered the HOA district and who attended community meetings the way some people attend theater, for the drama, called her that evening to report. She tried to say it was a misunderstanding, Roy said, that she had believed you had given a verbal agreement, that the letter was just confirmatory. And, Delia said, and then someone read the letter out loud, the whole thing, including the part where it lists the vendor schedule and says, and I'm quoting, "The HOA appreciates your cooperation." Roy paused. There is no universe where that sentence means you had already agreed. No, Delia said. There isn't. They voted 5-2 to remove her as president, Roy said. Pending a formal review of the inspection letter situation, the county's ethics board has apparently already opened a file. Delia sat with this information for a moment. Outside, the South Meadow was quiet and golden in the September evening, exactly as it always was. The cattle were at the fence line. The orchard was full. Thomas was in the mill house, probably at his wheel. The farm was as it had always been, unhired, unbothered, entirely itself. Thank you, Roy, she said. After she hung up, she walked outside and stood in the meadow for a long time, not in triumph, not in satisfaction exactly, in the specific, grounded feeling of someone who had defended something real and had not lost a single acre of themselves doing it. 3 days after that, she received one more piece of mail. This one was a card, handwritten, with a Richmond postmark. The handwriting was careful and slightly uneven, as if written by someone who was still deciding how to feel about what they were writing. It said, Ms. Crane, I want you to know that we found a beautiful venue outside of Warrenton, and we got married last Saturday. It was small and honest and ours. I also want you to know that I have been thinking about how my mother-in-law described your farm to me and how she made it sound like something she had every right to arrange. I think I knew something was wrong and I didn't ask the right questions. I am sorry for my part in that. Brendan and I wish you and your farm well. Courtney Voss. Delia read it twice. Then she put it in the drawer where she kept things worth keeping. She went out and fed the chickens. The ethics board investigation into Supervisor Dale Kettering's office took 6 weeks. Delia was interviewed once, by telephone, and asked to provide copies of the letters and Louise Marbury's inspection report, all of which she had organized in a single folder that she sent by certified mail within 24 hours of the request. Louise was interviewed separately. The conclusion of the investigation, when it came, found that the inspection letter had been generated through the supervisor's office at the request of a private individual, unnamed in the public summary but named in the county record, and that this constituted an inappropriate use of county resources for private purposes. Dale Kettering issued a public apology. It was careful and lawyerly and did not use Pamela's name, but it did not need to. Everyone in Crestwell County knew what it meant. Kettering did not seek re-election the following spring. The position went to a woman named Adaize Okafor, who had been on the County Planning Commission for 8 years, and who, on her first day in office, sent Delia Crane a brief letter saying that she had read the Gazette article and that she respected what Delia had done. Delia framed that one. The Crestwell Heights HOA elected a new president, a retired engineer named Stuart Pemberton, who immediately suspended the garden gnome policy and sent formal apology letters to 6 households that had received compliance notices in the previous 18 months. He also wrote to Delia to clarify, for the official HOA record, that Harrowfield Farm was not and had never been subject to HOA jurisdiction, and that the association regretted any impression to the contrary. Pamela Voss moved to Richmond the following March. Delia heard this from Roy, who heard it from the mail carrier, who had heard it from the woman who had bought Pamela's house. Delia received no communication from Pamela directly, then or ever. What she did receive, on a cold Saturday in November, when the farmers' market had been moved indoors to the old Grange Hall, was a conversation she had not expected. She was breaking down her booth at the end of the day when a man she did not know approached her table. He was perhaps 60, with the weathered, deliberate look of someone who spends most of his time outdoors. "You're Delia Crane," he said. It was not a question. "I am. I own the Turnbridge Orchard," he said. 20 miles east. Name's Callum Breer. I read the article about what happened to your place." He paused. "Same thing happened to me. Different HOA, different county. They wanted to use my barn for a fundraiser. Sent me a letter saying it was scheduled. I told them no. They called the health department on my cider operation." Delia looked at him steadily. "What happened?" "Nothing. They found nothing because there was nothing to find. But it cost me 2 weeks of stress and a lawyer I couldn't really afford." He met her eyes. "I want to know how you handled it the way you did." Delia thought about this. "I didn't panic," she said. "I documented everything before I responded to anything, and I understood that the inspection wasn't really about compliance. It was about pressure. Once I named it for what it was, it lost most of its power." Callum nodded slowly. "I should have done that." "You know now," Delia said. He bought 2 jars of honey and a dozen eggs and gave her his card before he left. His email was on it. She put it in her coat pocket and felt for a moment the odd and specific warmth of understanding that what had happened to her had not only been resolved, but had become, in some way, useful. She drove home in the early dark of November, the radio low, the heater working. When she turned onto the county road that ran along the western edge of Harrowfield Farm, she saw the gate in her headlights, the same gate where the Meridian Event Rentals van had stopped in September. The sign she had put up was still there. She had meant to take it down once everything was settled, but she had left it, not as a warning, just as a reminder that she had said no, clearly and without apology, and that no had been enough. She pulled through the gate, parked, went inside. Thomas had left a bag of vegetables on her back step, surplus from his kitchen garden, which he did sometimes when the season was generous. She brought them inside, made soup, ate at the kitchen table with a book open beside her bowl. The farm was quiet around her in the way it was always quiet, not empty, but settled. The cattle in the north barn, the chickens in the coop. The mill house lit up soft and warm across the yard. Delia Crane had not hosted a wedding. She,